a presentation on the life of Jesus, the Christ, and the correlation with the ancient mysteries by Jim Blakey from the Durham Centre for Theosophical Studies. First of all, let me introduce you to the concept of theosophy, a compound word. It has two derivations from the Greek language, theo meaning God or divine, and sophia meaning wisdom. This alludes to the ancient wisdom tradition through many thousands of years, a secret knowledge held by high initiates and their disciples, each aware that the disclosure could lead to death, or at minimum, the removal of the tongue if the secrets of the ages were revealed. It was Ammonius Saccas, a Neoplatonist and curator of the library at Alexandria, who coined the term theosophy. The life of Jesus and the correlation with the ancient mysteries. Let's begin. Theosophy gives us a very clear portrayal of the manifestation of the universe in contrast to the more common notion of the creation of the world by an anthropomorphic God. From the Hermetic Axiom, as above, so below, we learn how this was reflected on these levels and how Jesus, the Logos, the Word, falls into the exponential forces of will, wisdom, activity, in parenthesis, the Theosophical Trinity, and how the Bible, in its essence, gives us the path of the initiate through the Old and New Testaments. In the teachings of Theosophy, the majority of the Theosophical teachings are by nature esoteric, hidden meaning, cloaked in allegory and metaphor. Esoteric works on science, philosophy, and psychology remain hidden within the many texts of this description and require at least an intermediate student of the ancient wisdom to interpret those hidden meanings. It is my intention in this talk to attempt to draw from various sources of teachings the hidden meanings in some of those texts. The teachings are readily available to earnest seekers of the truth. In fact, the motto of the Theosophical Society is, "There is no religion higher than truth." A Theosophist looks to meditation, to the study of the ancient wisdom and service to humanity as a path of aspiration. There is no acceptance of dogmatic teachings as often preached by the majority of conventional exoteric religions. There is no belief in an anthropomorphic God, for instance, meaning the God that was created in man's image, an external and personalized God. There is, we believe, a divine ideation or noumenon, a divine plan that moves throughout our existence as life waves. This is more consistent with the Theosophical teachings. The teachings are readily available to earnest seekers of truth. In fact, the motto of the Theosophical Society is, "There is no religion higher than truth." A Theosophist looks to meditation, the study of the ancient wisdom, and service to humanity as a path of aspiration. Manifestation is a key word in Theosophy and replaces the idea of creation. What there is now has always been and always will be, in ever becoming cycles, or perhaps spirals to be more exact. To discover a more detailed picture of where we are coming from, I would like to introduce you to the proem. The secret doctrine, an omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle on which all speculation is impossible, since it transcends the power of human conception and could only be dwarfed by any human expression or similitude. It is beyond the range and reach of thought, in the words of Mandukia, unthinkable and unspeaking. The eternity of the universe in toto, the eternity of the universe in toto as a boundless plane, periodically a playground of numberless universes, incessantly manifesting and disappearing, called the manifesting stars and the sparks of eternity. The eternity of the pilgrim is like a wink of the eye of self-existence, That's from the book of John. The appearance and disappearance of worlds is like a regular tidal ebb of flux and reflux. Moreover, the secret doctrine teaches the fundamental identity of all souls with the universal oversoul, the latter being itself an aspect of the unknown root and the obligatory pilgrimage for every soul, a spark of the former, through the cycle of incarnation or necessity, in accordance with cyclic and karmic law, during the whole term. In other words, no purely spiritual buddhi, divine soul, can have an independent conscious existence before the spark which issued from the pure essence of the universal sixth principle, or the oversoul, has A, passed through every elemental form or the phenomenal world of that manvantra, and B, acquired individuality, first by natural impulse, and then by self-induced and self-devised efforts, checked by its karma. Thus, ascending through all the degrees of intelligence, from the lowest to the highest manas, from mineral and plant up to the holiest archangel, Jnani Buddha. The pivotal doctrine of the esoteric philosophy admits no privileges or self-gifts in man, save those won by his own ego through personal effort and merit throughout a long series of metempsychosis and reincarnations. In short, God is not cognizable. The universe is not one, but many, of a playground of numberless universes, incessantly manifesting and disappearing. The soul is part of a greater oversoul. To introduce you now to two pictures there, one of Hermes, the Greek, and Thoth, the Egyptian. Similarly, we discover through the Hermetica the lost wisdom by Timothy Freke and Peter Gandhi on the being of Atum, chapter page 17, that Hermes attempts to describe God, Atum. Although God cannot be defined with words, Hermes gives some clues for us to contemplate. God is oneness. Everything is a part of one supreme being, like the number one, which is the source of all subsequent numbers. God is the source of all. Yet, just as when the number one is divided or multiplied by itself, it remains one, so God constantly remains the oneness. In Theosophy, we speak of the universal mind and the individual mind. In the Hermetica, quoted above, it is said, God is the supreme mind. He is everywhere, and always the human mind is an image of the supermind. Through the power of the imagination, it can roam the universe and be like God in all times and all places. Hermes tells us that if we truly understand the extraordinary power of the human mind, we would then know the nature of God. Hermes is interpreted as depicting God as a creator, whereas in Theosophy, we see everything as manifestation. Everything that was, is, and will be, had no beginning and will have no end. We are agreed that everything is within the mind of God, noumena, and is expressed as phenomena. Hermes said, God is both the material objects around us and the immaterial thoughts in our minds. The world we see and sense is an illusion. However, compared to the great ideas of goodness and beauty, these qualities belong to God alone. They can at best be found imperfectly in the material world, but exists in all their perfection in the immaterial world of the mind. I'm sure that most of you will be familiar with Hermes. In Greek mythology, the messenger of the gods. The ancient Egyptians described him as a sage. Thoth, 3000 BC. who became a god. It is said by Freke and Gandhi in the introduction to their book that Thoth was said to have revealed to the Egyptians all knowledge on astronomy, architecture, geometry, medicine, and religion, and was believed by the ancient Greeks to be the architect of the pyramids. The Greeks identified Thoth with their own god, Hermes. The Hermetica was transported through the ages by pagans, Islamists, Sufis, Pythagoras and Plato through the Zoroastrian Magi in the Middle East. In the 15th century, the Islamists became intolerant of Hermetic books, and so refugees found a safe haven in Florence. Cosimo de' Medici, excited by the newly found teachings of Plato, sent out for other works to be found on the ancient wisdom, and one of the searchers returned with the lost works of thrice great Hermes. It took only 200 years for the Reformation to take hold in Europe. At the time of Queen Elizabeth I of England, many courtiers were profoundly affected by the works of Hermes. We will return to Hermes and the ancient mysteries of Osiris and Isis after considering the cosmology of the secret doctrine through Geoffrey Farthing's work, The 13 Tapes. That's a picture of Geoffrey Farthing. Where does life begin? 4 familiar words from a well-known song. In Theosophy, we are taught that life is an expression of inner potential, continuous unfoldment, ever becoming, where everything emerges from within, outwards, whereas mundane science postulates the theory of the Big Bang, esoteric science goes beyond, to the point of reawakening of the universe. Having passed through a pralaya before emerging into a new manvantara, this happens when the ray of creation penetrates the waters of the mother, the ocean deep, Mari, to produce the world egg, a non-eternal periodical germ. The above is akin to the act of procreation at the micro level, that of humanity. Notice how the womb of the macro level, the mother, the ocean deep, Mari, is similar to the name of Mary, the Mother of God in the Christian Church. We have at the macro level the Theosophical Trinity, will, wisdom, activity. In the Indian tradition, it is Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. In fact, every major religion has its own version of the Trinity. It is the Egyptian Trinity that is of essence when we come to look at the ancient mysteries in this presentation. Osiris, Isis, and Horus. In most cases, it relates to father, mother, son, apart from the Mosaic, Abrahamic, deeply patriarchal society of that particular time. Mary, the mother of God. Jesus was the overshadowed and impregnated by the Father. He had to be a highly divine being to give credence to the absolute purity of the Holy Child. There is much in theosophical literature that alludes to the belief that the Bible is an allegory of the difficult nature of the trials and tribulations of the initiate. In Genesis, we see the fall of man. In Theosophy, we describe this as involution, spirit becoming involved in matter to encounter the experience of learning through pain and suffering, necessary to progress to a more enlightened state of being. Moses, a great initiate of the Egyptian mysteries, led the Exodus and at times was scorned and disbelieved. We come to the trials of Job, an upright and righteous man who was tested unmercifully, but held on to his integrity and virtues throughout. We come to the New Testament, where we meet with the trials of Jesus. There is no historical evidence to suggest that Jesus ever existed in human form. There are many names that are used throughout available literature, such as Iesous, Jeshua, or Jehoshua, Pantera, who was around in 1st century BCE. At that time, there were two sects of Jewish Christians living before the Christian era, the Ebionites and the Nazarenes. See page 3 of Theosophy and Christianity by Henry Travers Edge. There was a belief at that time of Christ, the divine spirit in man, much like our theosophic belief that we can all reach Christhood through sincere and dedicated practices. The diagram below gives us a simplistic idea of the monad and the quaternary. The lower triad can be drawn to the heights of the upper through working on one's lower self. That's from the Constitution of Cosmos and Man. The higher triad we have is Atma, Buddhi, and higher mind, whereas the quaternary, the lower mind, astral, etheric, and physical. The ancient mysteries were communicated at the time of the Roman Empire through Alexandria, Antioch, and other places in Asia Minor to India and Persia. Early Christianity maintained the teachings of the mystery schools, but according to the mainstream, those teachings became heretical, considered contaminated by paganism. Even so, much of the teachings of the mystery schools were underlying a Christianity that was brought in, particularly by the Roman Emperor Constantine, to become the only one true religion. To do this, he condemned the worship of any other gods, particularly Mithraism, practiced by many of the Roman officers. According to H.P. Blavatsky, Collected Writings 8, she contends that the Bible cannot be excluded from that class of allegorical and symbolic writings, which have been, from the prehistoric ages, the receptacle of the secret teachings of the mysteries of initiation, under a more or less veiled form. And that the Christian canon, especially the Gospels, Acts, and Epistles, are made up of fragments of Gnostic wisdom, the groundwork of which is pre-Christian and built on the mysteries of initiation. The more one studies ancient religious texts, the more one finds that the groundwork of the New Testament is the same as the groundwork of the Vedas, of the Egyptian Yogani, and the Mazdean allegories. The Gospels were, however, symbolic narratives, too often taken literally. We saw earlier how Madame Blavatsky advised that the Bible should be respected as an allegory of symbolic writings that were in a veiled form. We will explore some of the similarities with the ancient mysteries and the Christian tradition shortly. But first, I would like to look at the process of initiation into the highest of the ancient Egyptian mysteries, the Osirian great mysteries, and the lesser mysteries, those of Isis, that lead up to the higher through qualified stages of spiritual development. I'd like to proceed next with a view of the initiation of the highest order, the rites of crucifixion, the tomb, death, the descent into Hades, and resurrection. And here we have a picture of the Great Pyramid with the Sphinx at its foot. We are given an insight into the ritual of initiation as described above in Paul Brunton's deeply explorative book, A Search in Secret Egypt, page 252, where he brings to life the Sphinx when he writes, "The Sphinx, like the entranced initiate, who completely lost the power of speech during his initiation, is always silent. Through its long life, it has never spoken an audible word to man. The Sphinx has ever known how to keep its secrets. The Sphinx guarded the mightiest temple of initiation in the ancient world, the Great Pyramid. I believe it was said that parables can be made from stones. To my mind, these two great edifices are perfect examples. Each have a profound message to give. Brunton continues when he writes of the Great Temple. For the ceremonial approach to the latter, that is the Great Pyramid, was always from the Nile bank, and everyone coming from the river to enter it would have to pass the Sphinx first. The pharaoh, or the candidate for initiation, would be advised that he would be given the greatest mystic revelation which could be given to man. In the earlier ancient initiations, the candidate would be led to the tomb or crypt, probably the sarcophagus, where the high priest or hierophant would minister to him, presenting the key to the mysteries. The ankh cross of the hieroglyphs, which were known only to the initiated priests, Brunton advises the same symbolic characters were used. So too, the very figures under which the gods were represented carried a far profounder meaning to the initiate of ancient times. The ankh cross, circle forward, was presented to the midpoint between the eyes, the area of the third eye of the candidate, by the hierophant, and was representative of the action of the goddess Amunet. Displayed by hieroglyphs in the temples of the ankh, Brunton points out, as a key, it symbolized the unlocking of the guarded door of that august institution, but as a geometrical pattern, it symbolized the eternal spirit of the initiate, rising triumphant out of his crucified material body. The circle, having neither visible beginning nor end, stood for the everlasting nature of godlike spirit, while the cross symbolized the death-like state of entrancement into which the initiate was thrown, thus his death, his crucifixion. In certain temples, he was actually tied to a wooden couch, which was shaped like a cross. It was through a process of hypnotism or mesmerism, unlike that of today, in combination with strong fumigants and incense, that the priest was able to awaken the candidate's mind while the body slept. In effect, the candidate experienced an out-of-body experience where he faced a physical death, along with some of his worst nightmares. Osiris was a synonym of survival after death. The conquest of mortality, he also had been sacrificed according to legend, but resurrected from the dead. The candidate for initiation in ancient days spent 2 days in the tomb or crypt or on a cruciform, particularly in temples of the later versions of the sacred mysteries. On the third day, he rose again, the day of resurrection. The initiation is completed by carrying the new initiate through the corridor from the tomb or crypt to the entrance, where he met face to face with the sun god, Amun-Ra, and his body radiated like the sun. The candidate for initiation in the Assyrian mysteries was met at the gate by Anubis, the ibis bird-like man. Sometimes this was shown on the hieroglyphs as Thoth, the god of wisdom and the great teacher of knowledge. Horus, the hawkman, was there too. And here we have an Egyptian tomb painting showing the gods Osiris, Anubis, and Horus, courtesy of Wikipedia. Horus, the hawkman, or son of the god Osiris, was so named because of his stealth and heightened vision. The initiate would be taken into Hades, the land of the dead, and tested for his courage, purity, and virtue, and was expected to care for the souls of the underworld. Following his ordeal, as we heard previously, he would become fully fledged as an initiate when carried along the chamber to the entrance where his face would meet the sun. It is interesting that both Horus and Jesus allegedly said something along the lines that you cannot come to the Father except through me. The experience of the initiate, in theosophical terms, is that manas can only be raised to the Father through Buddhi, Krishna, or Christ consciousness, the vehicle of Atma. It should be understood that the Christ has always existed in one of the guises above. The great teacher was responsible for the inception of all the great religions, and this is why we find similarities in all of these religions during our studies of comparative religion. The Christ overshadowed Buddha, Lao Tse, Confucius, and many more, up until the story of Jesus and the drama of initiation as given in the New Testament of the Bible. There is much in the texts of ancient religions and the Gnostics of different sects to support the rites of the ancient mysteries and the dual aspect of exoteric and esoteric in their teachings. And here we have a picture that I dug out there from Jesus overshadowed by the Christ, Buddhi or Krishna consciousness. The world teacher overshadowed all of the historical, moral, and religious teachers such as Buddha, Confucius, Lao Tse, and Zoroaster, etc. As we look towards the exposition of the lesser mysteries, we come across the double birth. In Henry T. Edge's Theosophy and Christianity, page 37, where he writes, "The first of flesh, the second of spirit." This doctrine of the second birth is, of course, a principal theme of Paul, and it is surprising that so little is made of it. But the real meaning is quite lost owing to belief in original sin and vicarious atonement, and an ignorance in reincarnation. Of baptism, Edge writes, "This is another rite derived from the ancient mysteries. It was the outer and visible form of a purificatory process undergone by the candidate for initiation. The importance of baptism in Christianity is the affiliation with God, the gift of the Spirit. In addition to the baptisms, one by water and the other by fire," Edge states that wine is often spoken of alternatively with blood, and both signify spiritual life. The words are thus used in the New Testament. Over against these, we find bread or grain, or alternatively flesh, and these words are used in the New Testament. This latter signifies terrestrial mortal life, so that the two together mean the higher and lower form of man. The comparisons are quite exciting when we discover that the reference is to symbols which were used in the ancient mysteries, in which there was a twofold initiation, symbolized respectively by bread and wine, or by flesh and blood. The candidate had to be pure in body and the lower principles of his nature before receiving the baptism of blood or the wine or of the Spirit. These facts relative to the Greek and other mysteries can be verified by reference to any encyclopedia or book on the subject. Of the initiation rites, it was said that there was a gradual loss of knowledge amongst the peoples, and that the rites and customs which were read in Greek and Roman history, or as practiced in ancient and Oriental races, seemed as to us as superstition, because we do not grasp their real meaning. And it is quite likely that the Greeks and Romans themselves, in later times, had lost it also, and continued the ceremonies merely from custom. But a further study shows that they originated in the teachings of the ancient wisdom. It is curious that we still go on practicing them, but there is an undying life in these ancient institutions which preserves them through the ages, like a seed under the snow, until the time comes round for them to be revivified. The cross, adopted by the Christians, was a universal symbol. The sun, moon, and cross form a trinity of symbols, denoting respectively Father, Mother, Son, cosmic matter, and the universe, produced by their interaction. In the case of man, who is a miniature copy of the universe, the cross denotes what John calls the Word made flesh, the Son, the Christ, which is in every man and is the divine part of his nature. There is much written of the cross and crucifixion and the descent into Hades in theosophical literature, as well as the New Testament and the rites of the ancient mysteries. So first let us consider what Edge has to say on this. It is also to be observed that the ceremony of crucifixion was usually performed upon the candidates for initiation into the sacred mysteries, which still existed in some parts of the Roman world at the Christian era. These candidates, at a certain stage in their initiation, were fastened to a cross or cruciform couch, where they lay entranced for 2 days, while their liberated soul went through the necessary experiences and came to life again on the 3rd day. It is possible that the story in the Gospels was founded on this. He goes on to point out that the crucifixion of the Christ is the symbolic name for the cardinal tenet of the ancient wisdom, but it has been materialized into the story of an actual crucifixion of Jesus by Pontius Pilate in the reign of Tiberius. One of the least mentioned events in the Christian literature is the descent of Jesus into Hades or hell. And yet, as Ted G. Davey, the General Secretary of the Canadian section, in his Blavatsky lecture, June 1983, on the descent into Hades, points out, when Christians recite the Apostles' Creed, they affirm their belief that Jesus descended into hell. It is probably no exaggeration to say that most of them have little more than a vague idea of what this phrase implies. At the beginning of the current era, however, and for centuries earlier, such a statement would have been meaningful to followers of many a religion, which flourished in the classical world and beyond. He quotes H.P. Blavatsky in one of her later articles as follows: "To speak of anyone as having descended into Hades was equivalent in antiquity to calling him a full initiate. Plato himself was an initiate, and in his writings referred to the descent into Hades." Page 1. At the beginning of the talk, we looked at the trinities of various religions. Comparisons have been made throughout history, particularly with Osiris, Isis, and Horus, Father, Mother, Son, and the Holy Family of the Church, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. The Son, Horus, or Jesus, the Word, were the manifestations of the newly formed universe, a fire-like blazing descent called Forhat, which was met by the Mother, Isis, or Mary, in the form of Mohat, the gentle formulating power, Noumena. Together they produced phenomena. There are many depictions of the similarities between the mother and child, Isis and Horus, and Mary and Jesus, but below is my favorite comparison. Isis with the sun god Horus in the Egyptian mythology, and Mary with the sun god Jesus in the Christian mythology. And we have a picture of the Egyptian Holy Family courtesy of Wikipedia, Osiris, Isis, and Horus. And we have another courtesy of Wikipedia, Horus and Jesus, the crucifixion and the resurrection. Both Horus and Jesus passed through the Egyptian higher mysteries, and as Fiona C. Odgren in Timeless Truths of the Secret Doctrine, a compilation, page 88, section 5 states, "To crucify before, not against, the Son is a phrase used for initiation. It comes from Egypt and primarily from India. The enigma can be unriddled only by searching for its key in the mysteries of initiation. The initiated adept, who had successfully passed through all the trials, was attached, not nailed, but simply tied on a couch in the form of a towel. thus plunged in a deep sleep, the sleep of Siloam, it is called to this day among initiates in Asia Minor, in Syria, and even Higher Egypt. He was allowed to remain in this state for 3 days. We covered this event previously, but she continues with the body of the initiate lying in the tomb when she quotes, "In Egypt, it was placed in the sarcophagus in the king's chamber of the pyramid of Cheops, and carried during the night of the approaching 3rd day to the entrance of a gallery, where at a certain hour the beams of the rising sun struck full on the face of the entranced candidate, who awoke to be initiated by Osiris and Thoth, the god of wisdom." And that was from The Secret Doctrine 2, page 558. All of the sons of God, the initiated, pass through the full initiation of the greater mysteries. The crucifixion, or the lessening of the karmic burden of humanity through the descent into Hades, and then resurrection. From the tragic history of the esoteric Christianity by Sean Byrne, we see how St. Paul also appears to have passed through the initiatory rites of the mysteries when he writes that Paul experienced all of this can be, without question, deduced from his writings, which are quite literally saturated with the Spirit of Christ. It is evident that he could no longer conceive of his own body without considering it as the temple of the Christ. True Christianity will be discovered one day in the light of the sacred mysteries and the teachings of Jesus, whether that be the name of the great initiate or not. That is not important. His teachings are. In the early years of the Church, we found that Hermes' teachings were accepted by some of the initiated hierarchy, but were later dismissed. We now have no initiated priests, and the Church is more invested in ritual, dogma, and power than the concentration of the word of this great master. Jesus, who condemned the scribes and Pharisees in his sermons and would be alien to the Church of today. The people of these modern times are no longer willing to be subjected to its dogmatic rules and omissions and search for other spiritual avenues for fulfillment, or choose to give up altogether. It is greatly the Theosophical Society that provides the keys to the esoteric Christianity today, and this religion can only be resurrected through a knowledge of the ancient wisdom. Jesus, as we said earlier, had many different names from a variety of sources. There were Buddhist groups, Gnostics, Christian Gnostics, and Jewish Christians. It is widely felt that there was a definite Buddhist influence in the teachings, supported by the Christ, the world teacher. We find a common thread between the teachings of Buddha, the Eightfold Path, and the Beatitudes from the Sermon of the Mount in Matthew's Gospel. One such enigmatic writing was from A Silk Road Gospel, The Secret Sayings of Yesu by J.G. Williams. He gives an account of the teachings which appear to be softened by a Buddhistic tone, as opposed to the harshness sometimes of the Gospels, where it is said that the teachings were not given to the populace because it would be like casting pearls before swine. Williams writes from this 6th century Common Era document, saying, number 1, that to the multitude I speak only in parables, for the world is drunk with its own importance, addicted to its own pride. Drunken understanding is worse than drunken ignorance. Much of what is said is about the kingdom and of the temple. It is said in saying 15, your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. What other temple do you need? And in saying 17, the disciples said, teach us to pray. Yesu replied, go into your inner room and close the door. Do not pray in public as the addicts do, for this is idolatry. Do not try to tell the external source what to do, for that is presumptuous. Just listen. Listen, I say, listen. Those who have ears, let them hear. In Henry T. Edge's Theosophy and Christianity of Prayer, he writes, supplication to a personal deity for favors desired is looking for help in the wrong place. It is presuming to dictate to deity and is based on the idea that divine goodness and wisdom needs the help of our prayers. The climax of absurdity is reached when hostile armies pray for victory over each other. At one moment is the connection through the Christ self with the Father. The concept of vicarious atonement cannot be accepted, or it denies the personal responsibility of the individual. Thank you for listening. I hope that my talk has given food for thought. This was not an anti-Christian observation by any means, and hopefully it can show the way to those who follow that tradition, that there is an underlying theme that has been lost throughout the ages, that has been usurped by power, ignorance, and manipulation, and that there are few, even amongst the hierarchy, that understand the true value of this once great religious tradition. It can be restored, but only through a more profound understanding of the ancient mysteries that have been carried forward by dedicated individuals of some of the more esoteric groups amongst society. Peace be with you. I'd like to run through some of the titles that I used during the talk on my research. The Hermetic, The Lost Wisdom of the Pharaohs by Timothy Freke and Gandhi. Geoffrey Farthing's 13 Tapes. Theosophy and Christianity by Henry Travers Edge. The Collected Writings of HPB, Section 8. A Search in Secret Egypt by Paul Brunton. The Descent into Hades, Ted G. Davies. Timeless Truths of the Secret Doctrine, a compilation by Fiona Odgren. The Secret Sayings of Yesu by J.G. Williams, and The Tragic History of Esoteric Christianity by Sean Byrne. And further reading, I suggest, I read quite widely, but then had to reduce what I'd taken in. The Secret Teachings of All Ages, Mystic Christianity by Manly P. Hall. Esoteric Christianity by Annie Besant. The Mahatma Letters to A.P. Sinnott. The Book of the Dead, E.A. Wallace Budge. Embodying Osiris, Tom F. Cavalli. Esoteric Orders and Their Works by Dion Fortune. Isis Unveiled, HPB, page 508. The Lost Years of Jesus Revealed by Reverend Dr. Charles Francis Potter. Christianity Before Christ, John G. Jackson. The Mystical Life of Jesus, H. Spencer Lewis, from the Rosicrucian Library. And further reading, The Path of Initiation by G.S. Gordon, and of course, the Holy Bible. I'd like to thank you once again for listening and hope you've enjoyed my talk.